Hey there! I'm author Sarah A. Chrisman.
And I'm Gabriel Chrisman.
And today we're discussing Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm is one that's been on my bucket list, honestly, since I was a child.
You just never got around to it.
I just never got around to it. You know, there are so many good books in the world, and I'd been meaning to read this one, and I just never got around to it.
But now you're very glad you did.
But now I'm very glad I did. And I was actually quite surprised. As a lifelong fan of Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables books, and as someone who was very highly influenced by Lucy Maud Montgomery's work, I was kind of astonished to read this book that was published just a few years before Anne of Green Gables and realize how much Maud Montgomery had shamelessly stolen from Kate Douglas Wiggin. Now, this is the same author who wrote The Bird's Christmas Carol, which we talked about a while back, which is one of our favorite Christmas books. And yeah, Maud Montgomery just shamelessly stole from this one.
In many ways. It's not just one detail. It's everything.
Everything. So, in this one, you have a young girl who is going off to live with two elderly folks, just like in Anne of Green Gables. The difference here is that Anne is an orphan and she's going off to live with a brother-sister pair. Rebecca is from a family where her father has died and her mother just has too many children to feed and educate all of them, so she sends one of them to her sisters, who are this elderly sister pair. Rebecca has an Aunt Miranda, and of course, as we all know, has a caretaker, Marilla, which Marilla, that's kind of close. There's a very minor character in this whose last name is Barry, just like Diana Barry in the Anne books. Rebecca's got a very good bosom friend, just like Anne does. There's even some schoolroom scenes that read very much like the scenes in the Anne books. It's all here. Which in a way, it was really special to me to, after knowing all of the Anne books inside and out, loving them all, it was like, wow, I got a new one. So in some ways it was like that. It was like having this lifetime relationship with the Anne of Green Gables books, and then suddenly finding one that was very much like those, but just different enough. It was also interesting just seeing how Kate Douglas Wiggin influenced Lucy Maud Montgomery. And there are the lovely scenes of rural farm life. Now, whereas Maud Montgomery is as Canadian as it gets, this one, it takes place in New England, rural New England. And honestly, the pair of elderly folks who Rebecca goes to live with, they make a lot more sense. It never made sense to me, Marilla and Matthew. They're lovely characters. I loved them as characters, but it never entirely made sense to me that a brother and sister would live together their entire lives. I mean, sure, for a while, but eventually they tend to move on and they tend to get their separate lives, and it was always just a little bit weird to me that Marilla and Matthew were still living together when they were really old.
But the pair of sisters in this book make more sense.
The pair of sisters in this book make a lot more sense because Aunt Jane had been engaged when she was a young woman to a man who died in the Civil War. Now that happened to a lot of couples. It happened to a lot of women who lived at that time, so it makes sense. And then Aunt Miranda is just, she's too grumpy, basically, to ever get a suitor, but she also wants to stay with her sister who has had this very tragic thing happen to her. And also, in New England at this time, there just weren't enough eligible men to go around for all of the women because so many men had died in the Civil War. Now, out west, it was a different story. Out west, you had more women than men, just because of who wound up out west. But
No,
in New England...
Other way around. More men than women.
More men than women, yeah. Yeah, out west, you had more men than women. But in New England, you had more women than men. And so it makes sense for there to be two sisters living together in the context of this book. Another difference is that early tragic romance related to the Civil War, that really solidly dates this book, because Aunt Jane is elderly by this point. And since the American Civil War happened 1861 to 1865, you kind of know when this is taking place. The Anne books, Maud Montgomery worked really hard to place those in this timeless Canada that never really changes until you get to the very end of the series and you get to Rilla of Ingleside and you get to the First World War. But until then, it's just this timeless Canada that's the same when Anne is all grown up and has gray hair and children of her own as when she'd been a little girl.
Which really doesn't ever exist.
It really doesn't exist. It really doesn't. Well, she makes a beautiful story out of it, but it's kind of a fairy tale.
Yes.
Because of that. This is a little more solidly grounded in the real world, which I liked, which I enjoyed.
So what about the character of Rebecca versus the character of Anne?
So they're very similar characters. They're both very dreamy characters who love to write, and they have great imaginations. They both don't believe that they're beautiful. Rebecca has these beautiful, enchanting eyes that everyone remarks about, but everyone says that otherwise she's no great beauty. And of course, Anne has her red hair. Now, interestingly enough, all of the pretty characters in this have red hair, which is an interesting contrast.
Right.
Because Anne thinks of her red hair as her great burden, her one great sorrow, whereas in Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, all of the pretty characters have red hair. But in terms of the characters, so that's what's similar about them. The biggest difference is that Anne is very known for that Spitfire streak. She's very known for holding back, and then just blowing up at people like Mrs. Lynde. Rebecca doesn't blow up that way. She just she gets into trouble, but it's getting into trouble for just messing up. Like she leans on, she gets into a daydream and leans on a fence, and of course the fence is covered with wet paint, and there are wet paint signs plastered everywhere, so she can't explain to her aunts how she could have possibly missed all the wet paint signs.
But it's less dramatic.
It's less dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say the Anne books are a little more dramatic than this one. So there's that difference. In terms of who I would want to hang out with and who I would want to invite for tea, I'd probably have to go with Rebecca, because she is less explosive than Anne. But of course that makes Anne's story more interesting.
Right.
So I like them both. I really do like them both. But again, I would probably have Rebecca over for tea. I might have Anne for a picnic in the yard where she couldn't break anything.
Right.
So I do think this is a lovely book, and I think it's definitely one for everybody's list, because it's sweet, it's charming, and especially if you're a fan of Maud Montgomery's works, this is definitely another one you'll love. So, thank you for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a nice thumbs up, and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!